There's a vast amount of racism in American film, but this might be one of the most racist films we've done.
No, the religion is actually just manipulating people and leading people into unjust wars for no good reason other than keep the rich rich. Whoa, man, mind blown.
But you're not thinking like a capitalist there.
I'm not. That's always been my problem.
It's a nice liberal nationalist movie where the president can go blow up aliens with a jet fighter, and yet you're still not actually being xenophobic. It's kind of amazing.
The whole QAnon universe, I was like, this seems ripe for them to grab onto one of these two movies and totally miss the point.
Yes.
And they have.
You know, the best they really have is like gentrification and real estate speculation in hospitals.
Yeah, that's Cleveland in a nutshell right there.
Fuck capitalism. Fuck all of this stuff. It is a movie that should be watched by organizers and radicals and leftists and anybody who wants to make a better world. This movie, on the other hand, means none of those things.
It's a Franken blockbuster, like you said, and it's put together in sequences that play out like movie trailers.
Really regressive gender politics, like incredible, but to the point of near parody.
No, Norm, George Wendt in this movie definitely would have been wearing a MAGA hat if this movie was made nowadays.
Oh, God, right? And then convince the workers to break their own picket.
Yeah.
Fuck this movie. It's,
Damn, I wish this movie was better, because that's a kick-ass ending.
This is a paint-by-numbers propaganda movie that completely works because the characters are compelling and real.
Welcome on, welcome all to the Politics of Cinema. On this show, we believe that films are never neutral. There's a political as well as an artistic message captured in every film, in every country, in every time period, and we're on the lookout for all of it. My name is Aaron Spears.
And I'm Isaac Miller. And on this episode, we're going to go back to contemporary cinema a little bit, because we've been, I think we've talked about this before, but, we've done a few contemporary movies over the last few years, but really it hasn't been systematic. And I think it's because we haven't been systematic in our watching, certainly I haven't, of contemporary film during the COVID pandemic, which has been most of the life of this podcast. So we're going to try to pick on some movies from the last era, disrupted era, that fit our podcast. And so Aaron chose this one, and let's walk right into it. So we're gonna be looking at Andrei. I'm gonna really screw up this name. Okay, just this is just the way it is. Konchalovsky's Dear Comrades from last year.
Can we just call him Andrei throughout the rest of the conversation as if we're pals?
How about the director? It's more somber.
Well, it's tough though, because he's the co-writer, he's the producer, he's the director. Like what do they say? He's got multiple hats he's wearing. Yeah. I think part of it too was where we met. Isaac was like working at an art house theater, so like we were very steeped. Anytime we were like hanging out in the work environment, we were just surrounded by contemporary American independent foreign films and documentaries. So
exactly,
that was how most of our conversations were steered.
For last year, the only contemporary movies I've watched are DTV action movies. So what can you do? That is not actually true, but we're
all coping in our own ways.
Yeah, it's pretty close to true.
I feel like your coping was DTV, and my coping was I went straight back to my college days of just falling asleep watching Mystery Science Theater every night.
I mean, it's what you do. What you got to do. That's not a bad one.
You do. So, Andrei has a very, varied filmography. I mentioned at the end of last episode that he had a movie called House of Fools that was where I discovered him at our local amazing Cleveland International Film Festival back in 2002, set in a Chechnyan insane asylum, also featuring Bryan Adams, the singer, as himself in the movie singing songs. I loved it. And then when I came out of the theater, Film Geek and festival friends of mine were just like, oh, the guy who directed Tango and Cash. And I was like, what? That doesn't make any sense. And then I recently was able to watch Runaway Train. I can't remember, some podcast recommended it to me, which is a Canon film from the 80s that, I'm not kidding, has a screenplay credit, or based on a screenplay by Akira Kurosawa, and stars John Voight and Eric Roberts, and I think Rebecca De Mornay's in there. And it's about convicts on a hijack a runaway train. And that's the movie. And he directed that one. So like he had this like little sojourn in the 80s of like making a Hollywood and, Canon film action movies. and then has been back in Russia making films for the last few years.
What a world, what a career.
What an amazing and varied career. And I think you'd mentioned, or we mentioned at the wrap up last episode. I can't remember when we were just chatting when we're recording anymore, Isaac. But working with Tarkovsky as well at the start of his career.
That's
It's
a
pretty
I mean,
wild.
well, so what did he do with Tarkovsky? Because I know he was what, was an extra in
Uncredited writer on Ivan's Childhood,
he was an uncredited writer on Ivan's Childhood. Okay, interesting.
and I think credited co-screenwriter or writer for Andrei Rublev,
Interesting.
or co-wrote it with Tarkovsky.
So part of it,
Solid start. gotta
yeah,
say.
no, I mean that is a place to start with your career. Yeah. I guess, part of what I wonder about is, how does that reflect on this film? I mean, should we introduce the movie itself?
That's probably a good idea. I actually, just to keep us a bit more focused, I wrote out kind of a synopsis we can work with as we're going through it here. That I think is fairly simple to go with. So if people aren't aware of Dear Comrades, the official release date for it is 2020. I don't think it got released in the United States here. Our local Cinematheque screened it, obviously because they weren't screening in 2020 for most of the year, early 2021, and then at the Oscars that were broadcast in the year of 2021 for the year 2020, it was Russia's official submission for that, which I think is probably worth noting in the background as we talk through the Russian history in this movie. It follows our main character. I'm probably going to mispronounce it because these are all Russian and I have a very English tongue. Lyuda, our protagonist. It's really 3 parts. It establishes her and the dynamic of her household, the general society in which she lives in her village, and then the government and her role in the government structure, both locally, regionally, and nationally, in kind of part 1. And then in part 2, in the middle of it, there's the massacre. And then part 3 is very much the fallout that you see the ripple effects of that massacre within the world that was built up in part 1. I mean, the film, I don't want to misinterpret it like that or misrepresent. The film isn't labeled in 3 parts. Just to me, it was very much, here's Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3 going through this story.
I think that seems about right.
Yeah.
One of the difficulties with this, so this is about a massacre in 1962 in a in the Don region of the former, what is now the former Soviet Union. It was hidden until the 90s, right? This is during the period of I think that the period of in which Nikita Khrushchev had taken over as the first sort of post-Stalin leader in the Soviet Union. In some ways, the Soviet Union had become a regular police state as opposed to what Stalin had created, which is sort of at a somewhat higher tempo than most. And I think it's one of the things that I wish that I better understood, and I cannot speak to this, so I'm just going to throw it out there, is where this situates itself within contemporary Russian politics, where this fits within the memory of the Soviet period, how this would be viewed. I mean, obviously it was considered prestigious enough to be put up for the Academy Awards, whatever. But, a movie that you want to sell to the world. But where does it fit within this memory exactly? I don't know. I don't really know the politics of the director. That would in some ways be interesting to understand. But at this point, I just don't know.
Well, one thing I did look up, and this is doesn't really answer any of the questions because I had a lot of those same questions that you have as well. The lead actress, whose name I'm not even going to try to pronounce out of respect for her name, but the lead actress was born in this town. It was about 10 years after the massacre, so that has to have some resonance, I would think, on a personal level. And it's an intense central performance that is just fantastic.
Yes.
I mean, it carries the whole movie through. But I ran across that when I was doing some research on the movie, and I was like, oh my God, how weird. I don't know. I don't know. I can't think of a comparison that just seemed very, very weird. I don't know. That would have to resonate with her just as an artist, I think, in a very intense way, playing this role.
So I think there's let's talk about the film as film and then the film as politics a little bit,
Okay.
or the politics on display. I mean, this is inseparable, but we're sort of do this. I mean, I think this is very well made. I think it's extremely well acted by basically everybody involved. I mean, the level of God, the level of tension and squirminess of so part of it, this is a movie, yeah, like we sort of mentioned the act structure, but its primary characters are Soviet bureaucrats,
Yes.
low level to high level, low level KGB guy, low level. I mean, basically, our main character, she's on basically the local council. Basically, seems like basically in charge of administering the town. Other than basically her daughter, who's from younger generation, born during the war, who I mean, we won't jump into the politics of it yet, but like, who's very idealistic and really believes a lot of the. Well, actually, you know what? No, we're not going to jump into this because that is one of the most interesting elements of is the layers of idealism around the system and how conflicted those can be. Right.
Right.
This is actually not a movie that portrays Soviet ideology in simple terms, and I really appreciate that. But I think as film, I like I said, I appreciate the acting. I don't know how much I like the structure, but I think it might just be that I'm not as interested in the perspective. Like so basically, I mean, this is a workers' strike against rising lowered wages and rising cost of living. And
What?
well, right. I mean, part of it is I don't know enough about the Soviet economy. It's a weird thing. I think I have a better sense of the Chinese economy in this period, probably. But like, I mean, you have probably relatively directly administered prices, right? You have a command economy, relatively speaking, in which the government has a huge amount of influence over what's done, right? You don't technically have a private sector. And so yeah, when cost of living, and part of it is during the Khrushchev years, as I understand it, it's post Stalin. They've the secret speech comes up, right, in which Khrushchev, officially, admits to the world the crimes of Stalin, and and a lot of what they're sort of pushing is economic prosperity and consumerism, in a context in which we're sort of at the one of the peaks of American consumerism, and they're trying to keep up here. But the irony here is that in fact that's not what's happening at this particular moment. Instead, prices and everything are going up. I guess so. Like, but as filmmaking, there's just a few things I don't know how I feel about the structure. Like, I get the idea of setting the stage, doing the
Mhm.
massacre, and then showing the aftermath of it. But part of it is because I'm more interested in everyone else but the bureaucrats. I want to see what the bureaucrats are doing. There's elements of that are interesting, but it really de-dramatizes things for me. Even though our main character, a lot of the movie, basically, she thinks that her daughter has been killed in the massacre and is trying to find her,
Right.
or may have been killed in the massacre and is trying to find her. So that adds a lot. That's supposed to add a lot of drama, and her performance definitely sells it. But for me, it just decelerates, and I'm trying to figure out why.
So I have a theory on this because I felt exactly the way you do. I'm going to read real quick the IMDb synopsis for this movie because I think this is where it kind of cracked open for me. I was like, okay, I think it's a me problem, not the movie problem. So the synopsis on IMDb that I read ahead of time, and I didn't watch a preview for this movie. I knew of the director. This was an official submission. This seemed ripe for the premise of our podcast here. When the communist government raises food prices in 1962, the rebellious workers from the small industrial town of Novocherkassk, I probably mispronounced that, go on strike. I want to watch that movie.
Yep.
The massacre which then ensues is seen through the eyes of a devout party activist. So I went into it thinking this was going to be, because of that description, I was ready for, okay, we're going to have like the workers in this small industrial town. There's maybe going to be a charismatic leader or two or a collective. We'll get into kind of some Russian cinema history in a second because I wanted to mention that too. And then the massacre, which then ensues, is seen through the eyes of a devout party activist. So I was kind of expecting if there's going to be a bureaucrat angle to this or a bureaucrat character, this is going to come in after the massacre, knowing very vaguely about this massacre that it was covered up, didn't come to light until decades later.
Right.
But then the movie starts up, and that's not what the movie is.
Yes.
Like, that's there, like you said, it's in the background. And so this is where mine and yours, I think, personal politics were intrigued by this premise, or intrigued by that. And then my interest always mostly ended up being right outside the edges of the frame of what this movie's actually showing you. And I was like, oh, wait, no, I wanted to follow that character. Why are we going over here? Oh, no, wait. I thought, oh, that seems interesting over here. And then they talk about something going on. I'm like, yeah, can I go see that? I want to see what you're talking about right now. So I think what may end up happening here, it's like personal politics that I want to see within this story that I'm not seeing on screen necessarily, versus what the film's narrative choices are being made, which usually in my book ends up being one of those, oh, I'm really going to enjoy this more in the second viewing because I know what it is now. And like, I'm not going to be frustrated by my own preconceived notions of what I was hoping to be seeing.
So I don't think that's necessarily true for me.
Okay.
I actually just think that it's a more interesting. I mean, I don't think it's just a matter of interesting story. I think, yes, watching the officials and everybody try to contain this is interesting, but it feels like half your story. It feels like something is deeply missing.
Mhm.
And you see through her family sort of rebel. I mean, I guess we're just getting into the content to a certain degree, but like the sort of the various angles of rebellion. Her father, it reminisces about the, like it feels misses the Tsarist period. Her daughter really believes in some ways Khrushchev's Russia as a place where they have rights, where the Constitution means something, and the daughter's not the only, and that they have the right to protest. Daughter's not the only one to say this. You have members of the KGB say it's completely understandable they think they can do this, but they can't.
Mhm.
I mean, one of my favorite lines for the movie is, the head of the KGB in the area basically saying, socialism is classified. We're pretending this is socialism, right, in some meaningful sense of the actual ideology of it, but it's not.
Mhm.
And we know it's not, and we know that's fucked up, but we're doing it anyway. But I think part of it is no, I think part of it is if you're going to go with a straight procedural, basically, which is what that would be, it's a
Yeah.
weird angle to do on a massacre. Like, is this really the perspective that we want for this? Is this, your sympathies aren't with any of these people. So you're going to have to make the movie in a very particular way to make that work. Or you're going to have to split your focus between the two.
Yeah.
And, one of the things I think that sometimes is missing, I don't know the director's personal politics, but it can be missing with when you don't have actual left-wing politics involved, is that that's not your instinct, right, to show the workers or whatever, even though the movie clearly sympathizes with them.
Mhm.
And, I mean, like, by and large, I mean, we see why people are grumbling, but we actually do see them as a mob. We see them. I mean, the movie tells us that they're justified, but we also see them as a mob in the same way that in the same way that the bureaucrats are. I think what it reminds me of. It reminds me of Shin Godzilla.
Of course.
It's not nearly that bad. It's considerably better than Shin Godzilla, but Shin Godzilla is a Godzilla movie in which all the characters are scheming bureaucrats.
Oh, I remember you telling me about this one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And and there's geopolitics and over, and look, I'm somebody who loves this stuff when it's done well, but they're not very interesting people. What I'm more interested, for instance, in our main character's conflicted nature, but I spend a lot of time with her in rooms,
Right.
and then I see her, conflicted, and I see it falling apart, her beliefs falling apart or whatever. But there's a part of me is like, well, this is what I don't know it. I'm trying to point that there may be an actual structural problem with making these choices. I don't know if I'm succeeding.
No, I get what you're saying, because like you said, if it was like a dual narrative, like you have, she's a main character, but then also somebody from like the workers, and you see that point of view, because it seemed like the centerpiece to this movie for the main character, because she thinks her daughter may have been killed in this massacre, is that massacre at the center of it.
Right.
And by the time we get to it, the only reason I care about what's going on is because I'm a human, and I know this was based on an actual thing that happened. You're like, good God, this is horrifying.
Right.
It's not shot in an overtly like actiony way, and even really in a suspenseful way, because again, most of the massacre is going on kind of off screen, and we stick with this main character as she like ducks into a shop, and then there's a few random shots that do leave her side. So that to me felt disjointed. Like if we're going to stay with her through this massacre, just stay with this character.
Yeah.
That would have made sense as well. And it's a very visceral scene, and there it's a horrible tragedy, and you feel it there. But I feel like as a narrative device, I would have felt it a lot more if I had.
If it wasn't from her perspective.
Right.
I mean, you're seeing these people get shot down in the street, right?
In and of itself, I know is a tragedy and it hurts, but like it would emotionally be affecting me more if like I had a stake in some of these characters.
Right. If you'd actually built up any of these characters at all, the only person we're worried about is her daughter. So I think that massacre scene really captures it really well, because like it captures the problem there where I mean, I think the director thinks that he's giving enough of conditions and people being upset with what's going on in the first few shots of the movie to get to create enough stakes in what's happening.
Yeah.
But I don't think it is.
Well, because mostly what we hear about is via these like boring committee meetings that our main character is part of.
Right.
And like that the unrest is going on because of prices or whatever at the factory, and that there's a whiff of like they might strike or something. I was like, okay. And also I think now in retrospect it's really pissing me off because like you had a character who was part of that,
right.
Her daughter.
Yeah, the daughter.
Like why weren't we just following her also?
I mean, part of it is this: some people are Costa Gravas.
Yes.
Where you can basically have a large portion of a movie from the perspective of like politicians and in rooms. Mind you, that's not always true. Like Under Siege doesn't just do that, but a lot of it's like philosophical discussions. It helps to have actual politics to do that with. I mean, Costa Gravas isn't technically a leftist, but like it's there in the air, right? If you don't have that, it doesn't. If you're not good enough, if you don't have that the wit.
Right.
Or the ability to dig into. I mean, I actually think the movie. We'll talk about the politics on display, and I do think the movie displays a lot of that interestingly, but I don't think that it's interesting politics on display. But I don't actually think that the movie pulls off dramatizing it very well.
No, I mean, I think some of it's effective because it's supposed to be like, look at the pointlessness of these bureaucrats trying to maintain this particular system. So like that's communicated quite well. Although actually they're pretty successful in suppressing the whole thing.
They're completely successful in
the long run. But I think they wanted to maybe not have it happen in the first place. But also it wasn't necessarily even the local politicians that were like, we need to get snipers up here and take out, protesters.
I mean, it does a decent job of showing how the bureaucracy works.
Right.
I mean, I think the best of these meetings are when the top level officials from the National Party come in and start knocking heads. And one of these is the meeting where they have all the sort of local officials together, and then you have the national officials, and the national officials are basically laying out the line, right? These hooligans who what you see, part of the difficulty, of course, is that if the ideology of your state is actually based on workers' rebellion and workers' power, supposedly. Right. But what you really want, and you notice all the rhetoric is around good workers or workers who work, right?
Yeah.
They have to find ways to dehumanize these people. And I think showing the process of how that's done, I think actually the movie does extremely well.
Yeah.
Of creating that set of rhetoric and the language. And our main character, and this is something which is brought up, but is not brought out to the degree that it should be, who is a dyed-in-the-wool Stalinist, right? Who she really believes in Stalin, but never really deals with like the actual bloodthirstiness. Well, I guess so. She's the one who sort of gets up and says there needs to be a crackdown, not what the consequences of that are. And part of, I don't know if you know, like what she's referencing there is that the gulags were opened up under Khrushchev. They're saying half the factory is full of criminals. That's like maybe made up, but maybe what they mean is, and I think this is implied in what she's saying, is that these are people who, would have been suspect during the Stalin years, but have been exonerated since.
Yeah, I remember she made a reference to like criminals or whatever, but I wasn't really sure what the context was for that.
I think that's the actual, so she
Okay.
sort of says it, but that's the context. So like basically, I mean, the state officials are saying criminals. They never actually specify it, and then
Mhm.
she actually sort of basically says, yeah, these are people who've been let out of the camp. They hate the system.
Gotcha.
Um,
Okay.
which who knows if that's actually true,
And
but
if it is, that sounds like a great part of a movie.
it would be really great to get those perspectives of people.
Yeah.
Um, should we get into sort of the ideologies on display, the clashing ways that sort of Soviet ideology is deployed?
I do want to get into that. I had one more thing, like film wise, though, I wanted to throw out there, which I think because we did an episode a bit ago on Battleship Potemkin,
Mm.
and I do not know Russian cinema terribly well. It's just not one of the areas I've ever really focused on in my film history research. I've watched a bit of it, but in no way to give this great context. But I was going through and looking at some like those top ranked Russian films of all time kind of things, and I'd seen a good number of those, and there was this definite thing of like, and I'm mainly leaning on Eisenstein, which probably isn't fair because that's like decades before Andrei made this film or started his film career.
100
But
years before.
well, yeah, but like the style of filmmaking there was more like it was more like groups. Again with like Eisenstein, like that was within a group of proletarians or peasants, rising up and come on, like he did the film Strike as well. Like it wasn't a single protagonist. That's more of the Hollywood thing. Hollywood's got like the rugged individualist protagonist, the lone hero, coming to save the day, the chosen one kind of vibe. And
Mm.
I really was kind of thinking, it's like, man, if you were just stuck with more of like that, Russian tradition of like a more multi-character group of characters that were all witnessing this horrible massacre through, fine, include a bureaucrat. That's great. We do want that perspective in there.
Absolutely.
But if it would have been that kind of an ensemble, and fine, make it 3 hours long. Like I don't care how long the movie is. This one's, 2 hours or so, or a little under maybe. But I feel like if it would have been more of like that, kind of group portrayal of this incident rather than the singular, individualist narrative that this one has, it would have been more effective for me.
And I think, sort of what I was getting at when I watch movies of the broad left in the 60s,
Mm-hmm.
when they deal with politics, they may or may not take individual, but you have the sense of a perspective and a society underneath that helps to make this stuff breathe, right? Helps to make it work.
Yeah.
And in this case, the individualism and the sort of blanking out of the rest of society speaks to me of like underdeveloped politics in the film itself.
Mm-hmm.
Like what is our point here?
Well, so then as a transition to kind of the politics and the ideologies on screen here, this I don't know how much weight you want to give this, but I looked up real quick Andrei's Wikipedia entry, and there's like a political views section,
Mhm.
and it says he was one of 103 public figures to sign a petition in support of Pussy Riot during their trial in 2012. So good for him.
Yeah.
Meanwhile,
Absolutely.
the next line is he expressed support for the annexation of Crimea.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
I mean, a liberal nationalist?
Kinda.
I mean, if you think there's confused politics on display, maybe there are confused politics on display.
Yeah.
I mean, part of what's going on is there's a weird relationship with Stalin in this movie, and that was one of my questions.
Mhm.
Is this movie critical of Stalin?
I don't know. I mean, are you going from just the perspective of the main character?
I think that so the movie as a whole. So let's jump into this here, right?
Yeah.
So you're in a period now. We're seeing the most repressive, incredibly repressive arm of the state, but this is not at the high point of Soviet repression, which is part of why this needs to be covered up. It was covered up in the old days as well, but like, yeah, this is not a period of show trials and mass killing. The gulags are closed. So if you're going to be doing this, I could have the politics wrong, but my feeling is if you're going to be doing this, it needs to disappear, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's damaging to the system as a whole to admit that anything is wrong. That's usually true. What's interesting about it, so if you look at the workers, and this is noted openly, right? The workers deploy Lenin. They deploy the ideology. There's a few people, this is something I appreciate. In any crowd like this, you can have a lot of different politics, from anti-Soviet to people who take it very seriously. But the basic argument that seems to be coming from the workers is this is a worker state. We have a constitution. The Soviet constitution was incredibly democratic formally, and none of it was operable. right? Like Americans are used to thinking of constitutions as important documents. Sometimes they are and sometimes they aren't, and in different ways. But they're calling on these constitutional rights. They believe they're deploying the language of socialism, and they're deploying Lenin. You see one sign of Stalin, but they're basically deploying Lenin against current conditions, right? And to a certain degree, Stalin, you see the daughter, who's this very young idealist who really believes that the Constitution will protect her.
Right.
Who believes in Khrushchev's project. She hates Stalin. The secret speech is out. This has been horrible, but now things are going to be better. And there's real hope. And at this point, there's real hope, I think, in other places too, in other places in the left globally, where people have, Stalinism had run its course, but like they're looking at Khrushchev and like maybe there's some hope for the Soviet Union to actually become some sort of socialism that somebody would possibly want.
Mm-hmm.
And, who isn't deluding themselves just to, as a socialist, as somebody who believes in a technical sense in communism, but not anything the Soviet Union did. I mean, the Soviets never claimed to be communist either. They call themselves real existing socialism. So, but she's laying out this sort of, the daughter's laying out this perspective, right? A lot of the people that you hear in the street or whatever are complaining and grumbling and looking at the Stalin period as one of stability, which is wild, frankly, when you look at the period of the Stalin, which is one of incredible instability. But they're talking about basically price levels, and I don't know if that's true or not. It's possible that it is. It's hard to imagine the Soviet Union didn't have crazy inflation at the end of the war, but you know what? If you have a command economy and a lot of control, maybe they did get it under control. I don't know. I know that one of the major victories of the Chinese Communist Party was controlling inflation. You're going to have a lot of inflation post-war, actually very much in the same way that we're having inflation not post-COVID, but post-lockdown.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have made that analogy to World War II. So that's another set of perspectives. It's not about Stalin. Now, this is reminiscent, to be honest, of the sort of neo-Stalinism that I think you see in modern Russia. I don't know a lot of it, but a nostalgia for imperial grandeur, or at least we were great then, or whatever, right? Sort of ignoring the really ugly stuff. But this isn't a movie that shies away from saying horrible things, including the fact that you're relatively newer KGB officer that ends up helping our main character breaking the rules, right? He hasn't done any executions, but his boss has. His boss had murdered lots and lots of people. So that's a reflection on the Stalin's period. And it's his boss who basically says that socialism is, if I were the workers, I would have done the same thing. Socialism is classified as well. So like that's another set of perspectives. And then, we have our main character who really believed in Stalin and really believed in the iron hand that he brought, doesn't believe in the violence of the system, is less naive. The daughter's completely naive. She's less naive, but is relatively naive about how things would actually work under these conditions, which is a little bit surprising. You have lived under a police state, right? Like, you have to know how this is going to work. If your higher ups are this freaked out, are you really this naive about what's going to happen here? So, but she represents sort of a nostalgia for Stalin as stability or whatever in a world in which the Soviet Union has moved on from Stalin and Stalin has been denounced. So she's positioned in another way. I really love all these different positions. They're all taking Soviet ideologies at different stages in time. And then the father, who's basically like admitting under these conditions, or the grandfather, in which everything is falling apart, that like he just doesn't like the system at all, and he hopes it all burns down, and he hopes he dies soon.
I was going to ask you, how do you think this plays out? Because one of the other things that I thought was fascinating that I really wanted a bit more opened up, and I just wanted more of, I think. Maybe that's a sign of a movie where like it leaves you wanting more. Maybe that is a sign of a good story. But just within the household of the main character, like we've said, you've got our main character, but then you have a generation before her and after her, meaning her daughter and her father. So then this Lyuda, if I'm pronouncing that properly, our main character, within the narrative of the film, she's a World War II veteran, party functionary, dedicated, very loyal, but like you said, we've got her free-thinking daughter, so that's like the new generation coming up, right? Like you were saying, that's the what's shit. I don't remember these terms the way you do. The Congress.
What, the local council?
Oh no, like there's like the famous Congress that like denounced Stalin.
Oh, the 20th Congress. Yeah.
So like she's got like that younger, like you said, naive, but free-thinking. She's also that's what you're supposed to be like when you're that age. You're feeling it out. You feel like you've got the whole world figured out. So you've got the new generation summed up in the daughter's character there, and that father was so interesting. In my, I can't remember if this was in my notes from watching the movie or reading some reviews of it, but they were saying he was born. I think he mentions being born before the Bolshevik Revolution, and so
Oh,
he's got that czarist, past to him. And so even just within that household, you're like, oh my god, there's just so much just political Russian history right here
right.
playing out in a kitchen.
Yeah.
And then he's at one point he's got his like his old forbidden is it like army uniform on.
And if the whole movie had stuck with the sort of dynamics that existed literally in their kitchen conversations, it would have been thrilling.
Fascinating. Yeah.
Right. It would have been absolutely thrilling. Those dynamics are absolutely incredible. If anything, the mother turning. And so part of what's interesting is like even the dissonance with the mother, where she's at the beginning where everybody's complaining about prices as she goes through town. And she's like, don't talk about this. Don't do this. Right. Like because the KGB is everywhere. Right. Like people know. They don't always care, but they do know.
Yeah.
But, or to a certain degree, they know. We sort of see their methods, and it's they kind of know.
Well, but also then because they're worried about like the inflation, so there's like a run on like supplies and everything. But then because she's a party official, she just passes the line. She has no problem getting cigarettes. She gets all the stuff she needs, all the stuff she wanted. So there's no corruption at all within this particular system we've got.
Right, and she can get a hold of like goods like pantyhose or something that like you wouldn't normally get from the city.
Yeah, no one's gonna. Yeah.
So like part of it is like, I mean, what's really interesting about this, I don't know how bad this economic crisis at this point was. This isn't like actually at a particularly bad point for the Soviet economy. And she makes the point that people sacrificed so much during the war. Why won't they? Which is, admittedly like ends in 1946. So that's, like quite some time ago.
Yeah.
But of course, the problem is they're not at war.
Right.
People will sacrifice immense things at war for in a war that you have to win against, the Nazis who will literally murder.
Yeah, for your survival.
Right. It's literally for your survival. You can justify anything.
Yeah.
Why would it possibly be this, especially when expectations have been raised? The post-Stalinist period is one in which expectations are raised on living standards and it's not being met. Like all these dynamics are super interesting. And in the end, we spend a huge amount of time with her coming to grips of her losing her faith, which I just didn't find interesting enough.
I mean,
despite a great performance.
Right. I was gonna say it's a great performance, and I think it's interesting, but it just needed something else. And I think because it hinted at all these other grand other things going on, I was like, well, yeah, how about a little taste of that? How about a little bit of this? How about open it up a little bit more?
Yeah, exactly. So that's just it. It feels claustrophobic. And I think I said this about we were talking about the massacre. We don't have enough identification with the workers, right? But it's more than just that. It's that the way it's shot is too claustrophobic. And I compared this to
Roma, you were saying, right?
I compared it to when we're talking about recent massacres of protesters, I was comparing it to Roma.
Well, recent on film.
Yeah, recent on film. Jesus Christ. Okay. Let me just rephrase all that. And like it really, and this is sort of unfair. I think he's a good filmmaker, but it doesn't get close, right?
Oh, no.
I think there's so much interesting material about this particular moment in Soviet history and how people deal with it and how they're dealing with it and how, even understanding, I think, a little bit more about the dynamics I'm hinting at, but don't absolutely know is the case.
Mm-hmm.
Why? I mean, I think we see it with the daughter, right? But I think I just want a little more contextualization, open contextualization. Maybe a Russian audience will know this better. Maybe this is another Roma problem where everybody had to look up Mexican history because you can't know what's happening if you don't know what's happening. But is a little bit more to get across what this means with this particular moment means, right?
Yeah.
Like the most interesting parts about it for me are reflecting this moment in which you're having this huge amount of state violence under conditions in which state violence is not at its peak, but is also continuous.
Well, then also, given the fact that this was officially Russia's submission to the Academy Awards, I don't know. I feel like there's a statement there as well. Like the way that whole submission process goes, that countries outside the United States like pick specific movies. I don't know. Like it feels like it's saying something, or it feels like it thinks it's saying something, but I'm not sure it is.
Yeah.
Like there's potentially a political rationale for choosing this to be your entry.
Yeah, certainly. Uh,
Yeah, I don't have an exact answer there. There's just a cinematic feeling I've got there with that one.
it's
Or I maybe I just did speculation, but I thought that was kind of, and all that to say too. I I'm not picking this movie apart because I think it's like a 2-star movie or terrible. To me, it's it's a solid 3-star movie. It's a perfectly fine movie to watch and enjoy, and people got more out of it. Great, like you said, it's completely possible that a Russian audience was like, "What are you talking about, man? You missed all of this nuance." Yeah, that's possible.
I think it's that I see all of this nuance and I want it to function better within the film.
Yeah,
I think I see it all there and I feel a structure where I actually lose momentum as it closes more in on her.
mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
No, it does, because the third act is like her desperate search for it, which I'm feeling at first, but by the time it's like it's going on and on, it sounds a little heartless, but I was like, I cared a little less and less.
Yeah.
And I was like, I was getting much more disengaged with that, because there's also like, I don't know, this bigger thing again, like off camera, or not off camera, like right outside the frame, where I was like, there's all this other stuff too. Like this could be interesting. And also I think because my frustration with the very like last 20, 30 minutes of the movie, although I feel like the ending is actually kind of solid, like the very last scene, you have all of this, how the party, how the committees at a regional level, at a national level are working in that first half in the build up to the massacre. I kind of wanted more on the cover up then.
Yeah, I mean, we see how the cover up works.
Little though, but like we stayed so much with, like, I guess also because she's not really sticking with the party as much, and we're following her, so we get taken away from what I think could be another interesting narrative thread.
She's not high. She's not a high enough official for us to actually see how anything works. I mean, we see some of how things work, and if she'd actually stuck around, for instance, to make her case, but she doesn't, right?
Right.
She just gives up on trying to be a political player. But so she's not in a position where we see the inner workings of power completely. We just see them a little bit from the outside, but we're not seeing them totally from the outside either, where we see it from the perspective of regular people. And you know what? That mushy middle turns out to just be not as compelling as either of the alternatives, frankly. Because it ends up with, I don't know, like a sort of a halfway perspective in each case. I don't know if this is, I mean, I've sort of made my case. I don't know if I'm being fair at this point, or if I'm getting across why this sort of bothers me.
No, I think you. I think you have.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, would you still like recommend it to somebody to watch, or would it just be like with a huge caveat to it?
Sure. I mean, I'm sort of wavering between 3 stars, which for me is good. It's a good movie, to 3.5, which would be very good. I hate the star system. I curse Letterboxd for making me do this, which it doesn't actually make me do it, but I do it anyway.
How about this way? Did it get a heart from you then?
No, it certainly did not.
Yeah, no, me neither. But
So
I think it's I think it's still a solid movie. It's impeccably acted. It's very well made. The cinematography at times is pretty striking and amazing.
Right.
And since it can be striking and amazing, I think I'm a little bit more overly critical and harsh at the times when it isn't. Because like, well, you did it here in this scene. Come on.
Yeah.
But that said, it's also just seemed like most cinematic choices in the movie left me with and a little more, please.
Yes.
And you're not getting it.
You're not getting it. You're sort of waiting and going like.
And it's fine what you're getting, but I was just like, it's a missed opportunity kind of a movie. That's where my frustration's coming from.
Also, in the context of Cold War and Roma, perhaps we should try maybe not doing another black and white historical picture.
Luckily, we're not for our next one, are we?
Well, no, I don't mean us. I mean in general. All 3 of those movies are like very personal movies that are functionally about the person's parents. They're all about the 60s or whatever, right? They're all about sort of moments of political turmoil. I mean, literally all 3 of them. And they're all in black and white.
Yeah, that's true.
So we should maybe just, I don't know. So what are we doing next time? We're going to do another recent film.
We'll see how long this will last.
I mean, I'm sure we'll break.
Yeah. But anyway.
But I think, you know what? Let's do a movie which it seems like critics really found interesting and not enough people saw, by a director who I think is a complicated figure in some ways, I think has made some of our great films. And also, I've sometimes wondered if he knew why they were great. I think we should do one of the 2 Ridley Scott movies that have come out this year. Which one do you think we should do?
Well, I'm certainly not watching House of Gucci, so by default,
I, I'm going to be frank. I actually am interested in House of Gucci, and I bet you it could be pretty interesting. But no, we're going to do The Last Duel.
Scott's going to be interesting to talk about because I'm really racking my brain for a movie of his that I like.
Whoa.
I would say like Alien and Thelma and Louise, maybe.
I mean, first off, those are 2 Alien is a 5-star masterpiece, right? Thelma Louise is absolutely superb.
I'm not, I don't have his filmography in front of me, but off the top of my head, because I was like, I'm not a fan of Hannibal. I don't like Black Hawk Down. I'm sorry, I'm not in the Blade Runner camp. It's fine. I've never seen Gladiator.
Gladiator's great. Gladiator was when I was 13, Gladiator was the best thing there was.
Oh, there is one I do enjoy. It's not a great movie, but I enjoy the one with DiCaprio and Russell Crowe, Body of Lies. Was pretty fun. But yeah, no, this is going to be kind of interesting. It's a director I've really not given too much thought to because he's never really grabbed me. But The Last Duel is so weird that it granted, again, big asterisk next to it. It came out in the era of COVID and everything else, but like $100 million large scale, like official, like Hollywood produced with the UK epic, and cranked out a whopping, I think it's like 30 million so far.
Yeah, it's been pretty rough.
Yeah, it's official box office bomb. But then anytime I see it popping up on Letterboxd, critics that I follow and I trust their recommendations, it's always like 4 stars, 5 stars, 4 stars. Oh my God, why are people sleeping on this movie? So
you should check out The Martian. The Martian's a load of fun.
Oh, I did like The Martian, actually. Yeah, my son and I watched that.
And here's the thing is this, okay? You will never, Ridley Scott gave us Legend, which I'm not going to say is a great movie. I think it's good enough. But it did give us Tim Curry as like capital A Satan. Like in the most Satan-y Satan costume imaginable. And I think that's basically, one, maybe his real form in a good way. And 2, that I honestly should give it 5 stars for that costuming.
Oh my God, this is amazing looking.
Yo, you've never seen this?
Legend. No, I've never seen
Yeah,
Legend.
you've never seen. Yeah, that's Tim. Just imagine that, but that's Tim Curry in there.
All right, I'm going to watch Legend before The Last Duel just to give myself a little double feature.
I'm not saying. Legend is fine. It's like a decent 80s fantasy movie, but like, goddamn, right?
It's like when we did the Brian Yunza one, Society, when you're like, look at this box cover, look at this poster. I'm like, what the fuck is going on?
This is it. It's like, I just don't think
I'm willing to watch a movie just because there's great makeup in it, and this makeup looks amazing.
But also, which actor was born to play, not literally Satan in this case, but like evil, the Lord of Darkness more than Tim Curry?
Oh yeah, Dr. Frankenfurter, of course.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, I'm willing to give this one a shot.
But we're not going to be doing Legend. We are going to be doing The Last Duel. We're going to be dealing with feminism and feudalism.
Ooh, that's a show title. Nice.
Yep. It's going to be fun.
Let's write that one down.
I really, here I'm a historian in training, and one of the reasons I got interested in this one is because I was looking on Twitter, and there's some historians who are Europeanists that I know are like, oh, they kind of got the feudalism basically right, which is not normally what happens with Hollywood movies. I wish I had enough knowledge to actually judge that that's the case, because I'm not a medievalist, let alone a Europeanist. But
indeed, before we sign off on this particular episode, we'd like to remind you to be sure and rate and review the show in whatever podcast app you're currently listening to this on. And if you enjoy the show or any of our past shows, tell a friend or two about the ones that you enjoy, or all of them. We're also up and running on the usual social media nonsense. Just look at the show notes for any of those links. And until next time, when we're going into feminism and feudalism, my name is Aaron.
And my name is Isaac. Now, stay safe out there, especially if you're in my former home of Cleveland, which, like much of the Great Lakes period, is now entering its gloomy, like, frozen tundra / after about a month of frozen tundra, it's just like, gray slush, plus the sky is constantly gray and there's no sun.
There's no Son, here, it's 45 and rainy every fucking day.
Right. It doesn't have the decency to snow. Thank you, global
Just be
climate
winter.
change. Yeah, just be winter. But it's not going to be winter because winter is, this is where we are now. It's even worse, right? The slush was bad, but at least you got pristine snow. Now you just get cold rain. So I want you all to stay safe out there, both because of the weather and because of how freaking depressing that is. Take care of yourself. Do what you got to do.